Welcome to Where Parents Talk TV. My name is Lianne Castelino. Our guest is Heather MacTaggart. She is a mother of four, Director of Unschooling School, a nonprofit. She's also the founder and executive director of Classroom Connections and co-author of a book called Overschooled but Undereducated. Thanks for joining us, Heather.
Very nice to be here.
Now, your organization, Unschooling School, conducted a national survey in Canada in January of 2021. More than 860 parents of children under 18 were surveyed. Before we get into the results of the survey, could you tell us what was the impetus for this survey?
We wanted to find out whether our feeling as this group that has come together and worked on Unschooling School, that our feeling that parents were dissatisfied about certain aspects of education were true. That we felt that a lot of people understand that that learning comes by interest. And that if you let kids learn what they're interested in, they're of course going to learn more. So we knew that as a group, but we thought we should make sure that people out there generally believe that, and that's why we did the survey.
Tell us what the top three key findings were.
Well, they were actually even more exciting than we anticipated. 73% of parents felt kids at school should be able to learn the subjects they're interested in, should be able to follow their passions and learn about those things. 67% felt that we need a school reset, as in it's time, during the pandemic and after the pandemic, to really rethink how we structure school. And the other one that I thought was kind of interesting was 57% of parents would have liked to have been able to follow their own passions when they were at school.
There's so much to dig into there, and I can see how, conducting a survey like that and getting those results is exciting, because those are all really meaty topics. Let me ask you this, though, as a mother of four who presumably has experienced some of these feelings over time, what was your take on what surprised you the most among these findings?
What I find as somebody who, was considered brilliant in kindergarten, and they told my parents, oh, she should be skipping to grade 2. Then in grade 2, they found out, no, this child is stupid. There's something really wrong with her, and she's not doing anything she's supposed to be doing. And that kind of persisted through most of my K-12 life until university, where I got straight A's. My take on it is because I was interested, and I was more in control of it. And then when I had kids, my first daughter just sailed along, learned to read magically by herself at the age of 3 or 4. And I thought, okay, well, maybe I was wrong. Maybe the school system is fine. It was just me. And then my next daughter came along, and a whole different story. None of it made sense to her. It was like oil and water. And what I found when I talked to parents about it is if they've had one of those two experiences, they get it. So if school was either some degree of horrific for them, they understand, wow, we really need to change what we're doing. Or if they sailed through and did really well, or, we're fine, and then they suddenly have a child they think, geez, this is a great kid. This kid's smart in so many ways. They're just either hating school or failing school, or so bored because they already know it all, and yet they're forced to do the same thing as everybody else. So it's those people that we find are saying, yeah, let's do something. So I was pleased to see that it's even a broader range of people.
Let me ask you, did the pandemic, in your opinion, impact these findings? And if so, in what specific ways would you say that happened?
I would say definitely yes. We hold open Zooms on Tuesday. So on unschoolingschool.com, there's a link to our Zooms, and same with on our Facebook group. And we often had subjects, but parents can, and educators can just join. And we are hearing so many things, particularly about distance education. And parents shocked that a 6-year-old is expected to sit for 6 hours or 5 hours in front of a screen and just listen to a teacher. Parents of older kids who are now seeing on very close range what the kids are doing and thinking, this is ridiculous. Why are they memorizing this when all they need to do is take out their phone and speak to it, and the answer is right there? Why aren't they doing other things? And there's a lot of that going on.
You talk about one of the survey findings, which is 67% of parents surveyed saying that a school reset is in order. In an ideal world, having been in this space for 20 odd years as you have, what does a school reset look like to you?
Thank you so much for asking that question. It is a great question. What it looks like is almost a time reset. School as we know it is only about 150 years old. Before that, we trusted biology. We are naturally born to learn. We are the preeminent species, not because we are the greatest teaching species, but because we are the greatest learning species. So we have things that are in us. Like, we don't teach babies to talk. All babies need to talk is to be around people talking. Doesn't matter what ethnicity that baby is, it will learn the language of whoever's around it. And we know for example, kids in Africa generally speak 3, 4, 5, sometimes 6 languages because they're always around those languages. But if you don't hear language before the age of 7, you may never speak. And that's why learning a new language after 7, you actually have to learn it, whereas babies are absorbing it almost by osmosis. So we have so many of those things built into us as human beings. And what we need as a perfect learning environment is a rich, supportive environment with loving, caring people and all the tools of the culture that kids need to play with. So computers and art equipment and science equipment and phys ed stuff and all the things you normally find in a school. But instead of the adults being in control and making this predetermined decision about what kids need to know, despite the fact that we have no idea what the future will really look like, instead of going by that preset curriculum, let kids just explore and do and figure it out. Mostly, especially when they're little, through play. And then as they get older, through playing with ideas. So it would look more like a community center than a school or a library, or maybe a combination school, community center and library.
So I find it so interesting because, I mean, we live in the knowledge economy, right? So the technology that kids are exposed to, social media, AI, it's a long list of things now that are contributing to knowledge being everywhere and not necessarily residing in a school. In your opinion, is unschooling an idea whose time has now come?
Yes. I think the things that you're pointing out about technology and information being everywhere can make the whole idea much easier for people to grasp. Because before, there were a few people with lots of the information. And so those few people needed to pass it to the masses who didn't have it. That is so not the case anymore. We also know so much more about how the brain works, because we can look inside brains and watch them learn through things like functional MRIs. So the brain science would absolutely say the brain looks like a jungle, and it makes connections, out of interest and out of repetition. And there's a guy named Gerard Immelman who's a scientist who coined the term neural Darwinism. And he would say that, the brain is jungle-like, and perhaps the best learning environment is jungle-like. So there's all kinds of input, and people can go and latch onto the things that spark them, that interest them. And since we now know that information is readily available and out there, we don't need the same kind of rote or rigid structure to allow kids to be exposed to everything. They will naturally just get exposed by hanging around with people of different ages, for example, and friends, and watching somebody do something, say, that's cool, I wonder how I do that. Well, they can watch a YouTube first before they go in and join it if they feel it.
So what do you say then to parents who may listen to this and say, rigor, schedule, routine, regimen, all of these things are cornerstones of the way the current education system is set up. And as you point out, has been the case for 150 years. The idea of not having that anymore would just spark fear in all kinds of parents and all kinds of teachers. How do you respond to that?
First thing I'd say is trust biology. Trust that we were created to learn, that we have continued to create ourselves and to create future generations to learn. that is inborn in kids. That, of course, to become a doctor, to become a lawyer, to become an electrician, there's a huge amount of rigor and learning very specific things that have right and wrong answers. And there's a time for teaching and classes on those things. So we're not saying that that should all disappear, but what we are saying is that that needs to be at the child's choice. There needs to be consent. What we know about the brain is that it can absorb something and spit it back on a test without any interest, but it'll not be there next month. Because for those neural connections to really happen, there needs to be interest. So we have this false idea that a system full of structure and rigor and high stakes testing and all of the things that, age segregation. Like, think about age segregation. Like, what is that for? Convenience of the system. It's certainly not natural to kids, and it's certainly not the best way for them to go out to go about their lives. When was the last time you were in a group and there were only 32-year-olds in that group and you could only hang out with them? I mean, it doesn't really make sense. So the data and the research is really far more on the side of this idea that we should unschool our schools, or we should promote and create places for what's called self-directed education. And if that seems like crazy to you, then my idea is go to unschoolingschool.com, look under the resource tab, and scroll down a bit and you'll see this crash course. And it's a crash course of fairly short videos on the power of self-directed education, which includes some of the science behind it. And I think it would be pretty hard for somebody to watch, spend maybe overall 2 hours watching those videos and not come away going, okay, yeah, there's a lot of structures in the system that we really don't need.
So on that note, let me ask you this, student-driven learning versus teacher-imposed learning and parent-enforced learning, those are just completely diametrically opposed concepts. And in the time you've been in this space, what kind of feedback in general have you gotten from people who you've presented this idea to and this approach and concept to, who were firmly on the other side, in other words, holding the status quo as it were? What kind of feedback have you gotten from those individuals?
It varies. There are people that will just shut right down. They're like, you're out of your mind. And, the way it is the way it needs to stay. I'll tell you, there are plenty of teachers who say, we know. And we would really love to be doing things a different way, but this is the way the system is structured. And that is very true. And there are teachers, we sometimes refer to them as responsible subversives, who, keep the lights on and do the things, but also behind the classroom door, help their students to explore on their own and investigate things that they're truly passionate about. And would love a system that is less rigid, less structured, more or entirely self-directed, because they can see this is what, this is where kids spark. So, I would still invite, and I still get into, deep discussions with parents, and it's not just parents, but it's normally people that say the system worked for me. And that's great. And I'm glad it did. And even if the structure hadn't been there and you're a person that really likes structure and likes things to proceed in a certain way, if you're in a self-directed environment, you can create that for yourself. You can make your own timetable, you can do it your own way, and you can set up that structure. And you can search out places, or even, let's say, in a school where some of the kids were self-directed, we call it being a free learner. And part of what we're advocating for is that kids and parents and families should be able to choose, my child is designated a free learner. And they're going to select things at their school environment that they're going to participate in, and they're going to opt out of other things. So having classes running and still being there, kids can still go and do those classes. They can still have that structure when they want to. And school environments where this has been happening, and the sort of the main one in North America is called the Sudbury Valley School, which is outside Boston, Massachusetts, and it's over 50 years old. And this is how it runs. Kids from 4 to 19 go there and they do what they want every day, all day long. And a higher number than the average, over 80%, go on to higher education. And some kids come there and they create their own timetable. And they say to their friends, hey, it's time for this, this, and this. Do you want to join? And some of the kids join and some of them don't. So it doesn't mean you can't have structure. It just means, we really think it's incredibly counter intuitive, and we know for sure damaging to force kids to do things that they really don't want to do.
On that note, what advice could you offer for parents who maybe are now exposed to how their kids are learning in ways that they never were prior as a result of the pandemic, as a result of distance learning, virtual learning, etc., about how they can support their child's learning? And I'm thinking specifically about parents who have children within the ages of 15 to sort of 19, 20, when post-secondary considerations are on the table, career options are being considered. What advice could you offer in terms of strategies for those parents in that grouping?
Well, the first thing is to get yourself educated, to understand, learn something about learning, learn something about the brain. As I said, we've got tons of resources on the unschoolingschool.com website, and those resources lead to other places. So this is a huge world. And after you kind of put your toe in, you'll think to yourself, how did I not know this? How did I not know there are probably 500 self-directed schools around the world, and I've never even heard of one? So I think that's the first step. The second, and if you already know some of these things, then maybe you don't need to do that one first. But the second is to step back, is to, particularly this year, if you can get your head around it, give your kids a gap year for the rest of this year. I mean, this is not a good use of time, most of what's going on. If your kids are loving it, great, fine. They're miserable. Say to them, what else would you rather be doing if you didn't have to do this? And have a conversation about what that might be. And you might be surprised that they want to go to Khan Academy and learn physics because that's what they're really passionate about. Or maybe they'd like to do an art project. Maybe they'd like to build your garage over again. Or maybe they'd like to spend all day gaming. And you know what? We now know about the brain. That's actually okay. And believe me, I was not one of those mothers. When my kids were little, I tried to keep them far away from video games. But we now know it actually makes really good neural connections, and is good for hand-eye coordination, is actually very social. And yeah, the odd person becomes addicted, but it's not very common, or it's not that common. So, if they want to spend all day long creating games and gaming communities, let them do that. The most, for most of civilized, and I use that word very cautiously, for most of civilized time, when we've had trades and very specific jobs, the way people learned them was through apprenticeship. And that's a lot about what John Abbott and I talked about in Overschooled and Undereducated, which is that the real model of education is play for little kids and apprenticeship as kids start being interested in doing something specific, is trying it out, is learning through a master. So we could say volunteering, a part-time job, starting your own business. I mean, so many of those things you can now do online. And so I would say, let kids use their time more usefully right now, because this idea of behind, it's a very false idea. There is no such thing as behind. Our kids are going to live likely over 100. Behind what? And the other mistake is thinking learning loss. There is no such thing. If you're breathing, you're learning. That's just how it works. So my advice is learn yourself and try to let go.
Always easier said than done, the second part of that advice. But you started by talking about, two of your children and sort of their very different journeys. I'm wondering, knowing what you know now, educated as you are in this topic, is there anything you would have done differently, or were they, younger now? What would you be looking at for them?
I would have done everything differently. Not in terms of how I loved them and supported them, encouraged them, and was there for them, but in terms of how I schooled them. So, my line, particularly to my second daughter who was miserable, was, look, it's not you, it's them. School stinks, but it's the game and it's the only game in town. I'm trying to change it. So for right now, just play the game and do the best you can. And, I remember this one conversation when she was about 9 years old and she broke out crying and she said, but it makes me feel so bad. And I said, well, that's why mommy's trying to change it. And she looked at me and she goes, hurry up. It was heartbreaking. So if I'd known what I knew now, if I, for example, visited the Sudbury Valley School the way I got to do, 2 years ago, I would have unschooled at home. I would have tried to find other parents who understood this and let kids hang out and play all day long. Because play is child's work. That is what they are supposed to be doing. And I would have, said, well, let's dip in and out of school when it makes sense. Stay registered, do the classes you want, don't do the classes you don't want. And that's really what we're saying with Unschooling School is we've got these great resources. Let's just use them differently. It should all get to be free. We in 89, we decided that children were human, and the Charter of Rights applies to kids. I'm not sure what they were before 1989, but we did decide they were human then. So one of the most basic human rights is to make choices about what you do. So, it's more than time that we let that apply to kids. And so I think if I'd thought of this idea, I would have just let my kids do it now, even if they were the only one. And I'll tell you, my middle daughter, she would have done it. And I would have done it. If I'd thought of this when I was 8, man, I would have just said, no, I'm doing this, but I don't like any of that, so I'm going home. And it's, it has to be done nicely, of course. And we've got a lot of kind of handouts and templates and structure on the website that could help parents and could help educators, do this in a respectful way, because we don't want to, turn the school upside down. Although, eventually it may get quite turned around. But in the meantime, as people say, yep, I'm going to be a free learner. Here's my form. Here's how I'm going to spend my time. Here's how I'd like to use the resources of the school. Let's have a sit down and figure that out. Once we're back into regular schooling after the pandemic. That's what I would have done if I figured that out when my kids were little.
Last question for you. The survey results are going to be analyzed by all kinds of people in different ways, certainly. What is your hope for this survey moving forward? What do you hope it will yield?
Well, I think what I hope is that it has people say, wow, okay, I'm not the only one that thinks that way. We need to be doing things differently. If most of us agree that kids should get to follow their passions and learn things that they are interested about, why are they spending so much time going through drudgery that they can't stand? Are they really getting anything out of it? And I defy anybody who's 40 years old to look at something they hated at school and that they still remember. For example, could you draw the periodic table? No, I could not. For sure, I could not. I remember the first thing about it. Nor do I need to. But now, if I want to find out, I can Google it pretty quickly.
Just a lot of food for thought for parents who watch this interview. Thank you so much.
Well, thank you. It was great to be here.